Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
A happy Tuesday to you, my darlings. Today I bring you the story Vila by Brian Marrow. Deep in the ground, a tiny spark fired and began to smolder inside an age-old skull. The dried black decay that once was a brain soon was crawling with what might have appeared to be tiny little glowworms. Out from the deepest, primal, feral shades of consciousness, it slowly began to struggle. Though intertwined roots and packed layers of mold, black clay, an ascent began as slow and methodical as the worm makes its way through its dark domain. Elemental strength patiently forced the long-settled soil to yield. As days passed, the shredded digits of its hands wriggled and clawed and tore their way nearer and nearer to the surface. The torso fiercely struggled through the ripped roots and loosened soil, pulling the limp legs behind. Then finally, in the middle of the night, a single bony finger emerged through the grass. With a slow, twisting motion, the right arm dug its way out of the dirt and stretched straight up towards the sky, then slammed down flat across the ground in a sort of morbid mockery of birth. The crown of the skull pushed the dirt aside and rose into the open air. The light of a full moon filled the deep eye sockets and exploded into the primitive mind. For long seconds, it was blinded by a curtain of unbearable light. It opened its mouth, and the charnel pit throat emitted an animalistic wail that reverberated in the stillness of the morning. The left arm surfaced and tore through the thick mat of grass. With unbreakable resolve, it lifted itself from the place of rest where it had been still and dead for so long. Old bone shone with a ghastly yellowish hue in the pale moonlight. Blackened flesh with the texture of rawhide stretched across the rib cage, down the backbone, and around the pelvis. Stiffened ligament and sinew flexed with audible creaks as it operated joints and limbs. Its head was a horror mask of long-dried flesh and gristle. The long, stringy, filthy hair was matted and clotted and sticking to a face that wore an expression of ancient desperation. The nose was long since missing. The upper lip had rotted away to expose most of the upper teeth, and its dried-out eyes darted around, spastically from deep within their sockets. Day was breaking. The old cemetery faded into view in creeping increments of faint morning light. An indistinct trail gradually became visible, starting from a deceptively shallow-looking hole in a back corner where no graves were marked. Under a slackened, rusty barbed wire fence and towards a dense tree line, the trail made a straight course. It was not much more than a foot-wide path where the taller grass had been laid down, as the thing drug itself prone with its legs trailing behind, through scrub brush, briar vines, roots of elm and live oak, and clumps of prickly pear. Its progress continued in a straight line. Mice scurried to avoid contact with it as it struggled on. A slight dampness from the morning dew painted streaks of mud and grime on its body, and the lingering stink of death hung in the air all around. It continued slowly, but without a halt, until it broke free of the tree line. Then it stopped. In a furrow of black clay soil, in a remote corner of a farmer's plowed field, all of its movements had abruptly ceased. By this time, the sun was hot and high in a cloudless sky. The thing was quickly broiled dry. Overhead, buzzards began circling what appeared to be a quick meal. However, when they landed to claim their feast, they suddenly became wary of it and instinctively kept their distance. A subtle fear of the thing kept them away, even though it lay as still as if it had in a grave. The drama played out for the rest of that slow, hot day. The ugly birds flapped their wings and pruned themselves as they tried in vain to overcome their nervousness. The thing was not much more than a bundle of old bones, remained completely still as it baked in the sun. Heat waves flowed across the field to cause an eerie distortion over the whole scene. The sun crawled slowly down the western sky, and the incessant drone of the cicadas began to dissipate. Countless crickets joined in and then took over for the night. The last of the birds finally lost interest and flew away towards their secret roosts. Vila Bloom sat with her long, thin legs crossed. She faced the hearth on the back wall of the one-room house where she and Eddie Fritz lived together. In her lap, a black cat was sleeping, and his purring seemed to echo through the entire house. She absent-mindedly stroked the old Tom and studied her own legs. She liked her legs. In fact, she liked almost everything about her young, firm body. It had been quite useful to her. She used it to get things she wanted. When she stood, her muscular thighs went all the way to the top without touching. She always wore ragged, threadbare cut-off jeans that hugged her tight and emphasized the gap between her legs that commanded the attention of most every man she came across. Her lean stomach was always bare, and the belly shirts she wore were just big enough to contain her golden delicious apple-sized breasts. Bright green eyes pierced through the unruly locks of her dirty blonde hair. In her short 19 years, she had learned how to make an impression. For some time now, what Vila had been wanting most was a man who could offer a place to live and provide for her so she could move away from the Bloom family, spread down in Stump Creek Valley. Eddie and his grandpa Shorty had been passing through the valley a few weeks back, looking for some goats to trade for, and Vila had convinced Eddie to break free from his old grandpa long enough to take a walk with her. She had thought he was kind of cute and knew for sure he had his own house. His folks had passed on several years before from pneumonia. It was easier than she had expected for her to get her hooks in him. The marriage was already planned to take place as soon as Preacher Donovan was finished helping his neighbors dig a new well. But Vila couldn't wait to be married before moving in with Eddie. The two of them shacking up had caused talk to go around. But she'd managed to keep Eddie to herself enough to dull his hearing to it. Since she'd become a witch, she'd learned plenty of ways to bend a man to her will. Eddie was gone for the day. He was over the hill at Shorty's, helping to build a fence to hold the goats. It was hard work, and Eddie came home every night dead tired. He would eat whatever she fixed him and crawl off to sleep right away. Of course, she didn't mind this routine at all. It gave her plenty of time to get things done. Already she'd been able to work a stone loose in the hearth to make a perfect hiding place for the little Bible that contained her contract with the devil, written and signed in her own blood on the first page. She was free to boil her potions and weave her charms so she could continue bewitching butter churns and causing sickness and other harassing the people down in the valley. Eddie was sleeping so soundly, aided somewhat by certain herbs she was mixing into his food, that she was even free to pursue the all-important task at hand, which was taking up most of her nighttime hours. It was a difficult and demanding project, but she had high hopes that her diligence would pay off soon. Every night for an entire cycle of the moon, she had been returning to a creek in the woods that ran due east. At midnight, she sat in the cold running water, clutching her lucky black cat bone between her legs and asking the devil over and over 113 times to grant her a wish. Then she would have to get back home before Eddie got up to go to work. She had to bring a cup of water from the creek home with her to mix with the goat's milk she served him for breakfast. The devil had told her what she was supposed to do. When she'd asked, he'd told her what she wanted was called a summoning. He had also informed her that what she was asking for came with a high price, but he wouldn't say what the price was. She would find out when the time came to pay, was all he would say about it. Vila refused to worry about any price to be paid. She knew she wanted this too much to balk at what it would cost. Now as she sat facing the hearth and the dying fire, she knew the time had come for her to return to the creek yet again. She shooed the tomcat from her lap and headed out the door. The thing stirred. The sudden relapse of motion startled a lone coyote, which had been eyeing it for several long minutes. The coyote sprinted away across the field, and the thing resumed its trek, out of the furrows, into the tall grass, straight towards a large creek that flowed down into a large valley. When it reached the creek, it plunged in and caught the current. The creek traveled swiftly down a hill into a thick forest of elm and oak. The moon was full again, but not much of its light could penetrate the trees. The thing floated along like driftwood until the current slowed down. A small branch forked off the creek traveling due east, and the thing navigated itself onto it. The branch quickly became shallow and slow-moving, slowing almost to a trickle. The thing floated motionlessly. Then it bumped softly into the bare back of Vila Bloom. "There you are," she said. "About time you showed up. Been sitting in this cold-ass water about long enough. Come on, let's go. I got a place all set up where you can hide till I'm ready for you." She bundled the thing into a burlap sack and practically danced through the woods back to the house. When she got there, she deposited the sack behind the house in a stack of firewood and tiptoed inside to start Eddie's breakfast. Her timing was yet again flawless. She'd already poured the last cup of creek water into his glass of goat's milk and fried his eggs and sausage before he even stirred. Now she got him up and fed him and sent him off to Shorty's with a juicy kiss before the sun was all the way up. Now she could settle into her day and relax. She stoked the fire in the hearth and dropped some dry leaves into the Dutch oven. A pungent aroma soon filled the house. She fried herself some eggs and sausage and sat down to eat. The old tomcat popped his head in through the cat hole by the front door, and Vila gave him a shy little smile. She tossed a chunk of sausage down on the rough-hewn floor, and the cat strolled over to join her for breakfast. When she'd finished eating, she went to the hearth to fetch the cast-iron skillet. It was cold by now. She moved towards the washtub where she'd cleaned the dishes, but stopped short and kneeled in front of the cat. He tilted his head and closed his eyes as she scratched the sweet spot behind his ears. The skillet slowly raised over her head in her right hand, and suddenly, with wicked force and lightning speed, she brought it down directly on top of the cat's head. Blood splattered and its body convulsed violently for several minutes. Once it had settled down, she picked it and the skillet up, dropped the skillet in the washtub, and carried the still twitching body to the hearth. She held it while its blood drained into the Dutch oven and mingled with the aroma of the burning leaves, the smile lingering on her face. The body was laid on the warm flagstones of the hearth to be skinned. Vila hummed pleasantly as she worked. When she was done, she laid the skin out flat and scooped the innards into a small bucket so they could be dumped out back of the house. On her way back in, she grabbed the burlap sack. "Here you go," she purred as she carefully removed the thing from the bag and laid it beside the cat skin. "I thought you could use a little hair on top." She stretched the cat skin over the bald crown of the thing's skull. "The devil said you were called a summoning, but I think I'm going to call you something else. You're my little pet now. I think I'm going to call you Skunk." "Yeah, that sounds real good. Skunk." Vila trimmed the edges of the cat's hide with her skinning knife, cut it so it fit around the face, and let it drape over the back of the skull, leaving the tail attached. With its matted hair hanging underneath, it looked like it was wearing a coonskin hat. It gazed into her face with an expression that somehow resembled affection. "Now let's see if we can get those legs of yours working." She wiped the skinning knife clean and placed a small cut in the palm of her left hand and let her own blood mix what was already in the Dutch oven. Then she dropped in one of her precious witch balls. She would have to spend this one witch ball to make this one potion work, and it left her with only 6 of the hairy, sour-smelling balls. She hoped it would be worth it, because she could only make witch balls once a year. Into the pot she poured some water she'd gathered from a hollow log at midnight and some bone meal. After it was all stirred together, she boiled it down until it was a dry paste. Then she packed the paste around the thing's hip joints and knees. It began to shudder all over, then rolled onto its side and snapped into a fetal position. Then, in an instant, it was on all fours. It no longer moved sluggishly, but with sharpened reflexes of a wild cat. Its fingers and toes clicked on the floor as it happily circled over Vila's feet. "There you go," she cooed. "Now, how about you sit over there so I can get this mess all cleaned up?" Vila had no way of knowing how long her trance lasted. She assumed it must have been several hours, since the moon had climbed high in the sky, and a chill had crept down into her bones. The small fire she had used to burn leaves, whose smoke had caused her trance, was almost completely cold. Silence lay like a blanket in the underbrush around her. She had been trying to call up the devil again, but was beginning to have her doubts about whether or not he was going to show. She was just about to stir from where she sat, cross-legged, when a scuffling noise came from behind a tangle of briar and grapevine directly in front of her. Then came the sound of a snort. Vila felt a shiver crawl up her spine as she imagined the sound to be that of a wild boar. "Is that you?" She struggled to speak. Her throat had suddenly gone dry. "You know." His voice was a quiet, hissing growl. Her terror was somewhat relieved. The manic fear of possibly being gored by a wild pig was replaced by the subtle unease of the devil's presence. She had seen him and spoke to him several times, but still couldn't get comfortable when he was around. He made her feel apprehensive and anxious and caused a tingling heat deep inside of her. She couldn't help feeling excited as well as aroused and terrified all at the same time. "Come out where I can see you," Vila said. "I cannot. My hunger is high tonight. You must remain where you are and keep very still. Your scent is very tempting to me. Why have you called me?" He was only visible by his eyes. They seemed to catch the moonlight and magnify it. They were pale yellow, unblinking. They were the eyes of ancient malice and terrible, merciless hunger. I still need a little help," she staggered. "I'm going to get that bastard, but I just don't know exactly how I'm going to get him. I want him skinned alive for what he done to me when I was a little girl. I ain't ever going to forget that shit. But you gotta... I need your help. Please." "I have helped you." "Well, yeah. I know that, and I'm grateful for sure. And I'm going to use what you gave me. But I just need to know how to get that bastard. He's always in his damn house with his kin all around him. He hides behind them. I need to know how I can smoke him out. I want him alone so he can pay for how he done me. And so he'll know it's me that's making him pay. He ain't nothing more than a darn old stinking pervert." "What have you brought for payment?" "I got this here whole ham. It ain't been cooked at all. I can leave it right here for you." The hoarse voice sounded like gravel in the pit of his throat. "Very well, but you must do exactly as I say." "I surely will." A long, heavy pause. His breath hissed through rows of razor teeth. "All right. You will wait until next Sunday. You will walk alone into the valley. You will arrive at his house as the sun is rising. You will walk into the house without knocking or calling out for anyone. Go directly to his bed. You should remember well where that is. Correct. Then speak his name. This shall give you your satisfaction. Now, leave me and return to your house and your Eddie. The ancient eyes did not turn away. All right, then. I'll do just that. And thanks. Vila knew better than to question the devil about anything he said. She got up slowly, painfully conscious of the pressure of those staring eyes. Once the blood flow returned to her legs, she quietly walked away. Behind her, the sound of raw ham being torn and devoured caused a faint nausea deep within her empty stomach. Once again, Vila made it home just before sunrise. Eddie was beginning to stir. She gave him a warm, soft, long kiss. She put her undivided attention into it. He began to pull her close. Now you just wait a minute, she teased. You're going to have to let me warm up some water and get you in that big wash tub first. I ain't going to roll around with your goat-smelling self. Let me clean you up a little bit. I promise it'll be worth your while. Whatever you say, my little sweet darling, Eddie rolled over. Hell, it's Saturday anyway. I don't think Shorty's going to throw a fit or anything if I don't show this morning. That darn fence is just about finished. He sighed deeply and was dozing again in a few minutes. Vila stroked the fire and started hauling in water from the rain barrel. Delicately she bathed him, then got undressed herself and led him back to their bed. They spent the entire day engrossed in each other. He would show her what he wanted to do, and she would show him how she wanted him to do it. Their youthful lusts ebbed and flowed. Exquisite sensations filled their minds and bodies to overflowing. Eventually, they began to wear down and settled into each other's arms, their bodies pressed together and peacefully still. Eddie spoke gently to her. You know, I've been dreaming about you a lot. I see you in the trees in the morning fog. Then you look around and notice me, and you smile so bright. It's like the sun is in your face. I mean, it's like I'm just looking straight into the sun. Then it seems like I can't take all that light and I have to turn away. I don't want to turn away, but I have to. It's like, in my dream, I know that if I can look away, I'd lose you, and I'd have to run through the trees to find you. But I can't run fast. I can't even run at all. Then it's dark and I'm struggling, and the dark is real thick, and it sticks to me. And sometimes I know I'm dreaming and I fight to wake up, 'cause I know if I don't, I'm just gonna fall and keep falling. Then I wake up, and you're already up cooking and getting things ready for me like you were this morning. It's always the same, just like that. Oh, baby, Vila cooed, her warm breath brushing his cheek, her fingertips tenderly tracing the lines of his cheekbones. It's all right, babe. I know it is, girl, I know. It don't scare me or nothing like that. His hands flowed down her side and came to rest at the curve of her hip. He sighed deeply and closed his eyes, lapsing into a contented sleep. Vila cooed softly to herself as she studied Eddie's peaceful face and stroked his long, jet-black hair, his hawkish nose, high cheekbones, and carved brow lingering in her mind as she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next thing she heard was a knocking at the door. She snapped awake. The morning sun caused the shuttered windows to glow warmly. "Good morning, y'all!" It was Shorty Fritz's voice outside the door. "Hang on, Shorty, we ain't dressed. Give us a minute." Sleep slowly began to clear from her mind like a fog. She slipped into a pair of cotton pants with a drawstring at the waist and an oversized shirt. Then she shook Eddie. "Shorty's here, babe." He moaned a little and stayed where he was. Vila answered the door. "Hey, Shorty." Shorty was built like a tree stump. He was just over 5 feet tall, almost cylindrical from shoulders to waist, with powerful arms and thick legs. He wore bib overalls with blue denim shirt underneath. His hair was a white, flat top, and his eyes shined pale blue from beneath white, bushy eyebrows. A big smile rested with ease on his deeply sunburnt face. In one hand, he clutched a little brown ceramic jug. "I thought y'all might care for some of these corn squeezins. Come on in." Vila stepped out of the doorway and pulled a chair to the table for him to sit. She perched herself on the corner of the bed. "Oh, I ain't gonna stay long. Just kind of wanting to be sure your man there doing all right. Thought maybe I might have worked him Bert near down into the ground." He snorted out a quick chuckle and looked towards the bed with a smirk. "Looks like maybe I ain't the only one been working him. He is still breathing, ain't he? I ain't seen him move a muscle." "Oh, yeah, he can still move all right." She returned his smirk. "You want some coffee, Shorty?" "If you want, I could." "Nah, that's all right, darling. I gotta get myself back to the house. I ain't fed them goats yet. Nor the chickens neither. Y'all take care of yourself, and I'll see you tomorrow morning so we can finish that fence, Eddie?" "You know it, Grandpa," Eddie moaned from somewhere under the covers. "All right, then. Y'all tell me how them squeezes turned out. I think it's pretty damn good batch myself. I hear the preacher's just about got that well dug. Guess them old wedding bells will be ringing pretty soon." He sprang to his feet and out the door. "I'll see you two later then. Bye now." He bounced up the road and out of sight. Vila started breakfast. Sunday passed uneventfully. Monday morning broke clean and crisp. The balmy night had ended with a brief drop in temperature, and a light, cool breeze caressed Vila's face as she watched Eddie walk up the road toward Shorty's. She stood in the open doorway and stretched all the way up on her tiptoes. Fully rested and relaxed, she was in the mood for a little mischief. She found a good hiding place for the thing a few hundred feet from the house, in the scrub brush. It remained there frozen in a crouch at her command day and night. She walked over to wake it up. "Morning, skunk. Want to have some fun? I think that old hag, Sadie Bagley, could use a little humbling. She's been wagging her tongue lately about things that ain't none of her business. What I do with Eddie ain't nobody's business for sure. Think she's some kind of witch, what with them old geezers she's been beguiling. Got 'em all drooling over her and following her around, doing anything she tells 'em. You think she hung the moon or something. She must think she's somebody the way she shakes them old chicken bones. Come on, skunk. Let's go show her a thing or two." The thing had snapped to life and was dancing at her feet like an excited dog, begging for affection. When she turned to go, it hopped along behind her, right on her heels. They reached Sadie Bagley's single-sided house before midday. Sadie had just filled her butter churn with what that morning's milk from her cow she called blackin'. Vila crept up behind some small cedars about 50 feet from Sadie's front porch and watched as Sadie settled into the straight-back chair and began to churn. A troop of chickens was working its way around the side of the house. Their pace quickened when they saw her sit, and they scratched and pecked at the bare ground, feigning interest in their foraging while keeping a sharp eye on Sadie. "All right, you old hens, just hold your horses a minute," Sadie said, as she rose to fetch an old canvas bag full of hen scratch on the corner of the porch. Vila could barely restrain a giggle as the thing came around the opposite corner of the house, slid silently onto the porch, and tipped the churn over. Sadie swung around as she heard the crash, but the thing had already slipped behind her to elude her sight. As she hurried towards the spilled churn, the thing hopped away through a flurry of spooked chickens. "Lordy mercy, is someone bewitching me?" Sadie asked the thin air. She disappeared through the front door to get a wreath of dry garlic to hang on her door and a small change purse with 2 worn silver dimes inside to protect her while she refilled the churn and started over. By the time she'd returned to the porch, Vila was far enough away to laugh out loud. For the rest of the week, incidents all around the valley set many folks on edge and kept the local witch doctors busy selling charms and remedies for all sorts of curses and bewitchings. The old pig farmer, James Woodard, had to evacuate his house on one Sunday evening because it filled with smoke from his cook fire. He later discovered that the top few layers of brick on his chimney had been knocked in to clog it up. The Skinner family awoke one morning to find all of their chickens in their garden, the door to their coop having been removed and thrown on top of the house. Various milk pails were overturned, along with feed troughs and rain barrels at several homesteads throughout the valley. Vila couldn't remember ever having so much fun. As the week came to a close, and Eddie and Shorty finished the goat fence, her anticipation swelled as she looked forward to her confrontation with her grandfather. Saturday night was finally here. Vila slid carefully out of bed and got dressed, leaving Eddie breathing slowly and steadily in deep sleep. She crept out the door and around the back of the house where the thing was hidden. "All right, Skunk, I'm about to head over to the valley now. You come on with me. Let's go now." The thing did not respond. It squatted beside a briar bush as motionless as a tree stump. Vila's brows furrowed in surprise. "What's the matter? Ain't you coming with me? I done told the devil I was going to use you for this. Hell, this is the whole reason why you're here in the first place. Now come along with me, gosh dang it." Still no response. "Well, all right then. I guess I ain't got no time to stand around here cussing you. I'm supposed to be at Pawpaw's by sunup. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do over there without you. I really don't even know what I'm going to do at all. All he told me to do was to say Pawpaw's name. What's that supposed to do anyway? Well, if you ain't coming, I guess I'm going alone. Time's a-wasting. I better go and do what that damn devil told me to do, or he ain't going to be happy with me at all. Maybe you ain't supposed to do nothing after all." She set out for Stump Creek Valley directly through the woods. She didn't want to be seen by anyone, so she had to stay off the road. The moon had set and the night was pitch dark. Vila practically had to feel her way along, but she knew the way well enough. As she walked, she allowed some of her memories of Pawpaw Bloom to surface in her mind. They were vivid, painful memories. His abuse had lasted a long time. Almost as far back as she could remember, Pawpaw acted as if every female member of his household was his own personal property. and throughout her years as a little girl, Vila had known no other way to live. Each of the granddaughters had to take her turn in his room at night, like clockwork. The older Vila became, the more unnatural Papa's habits began to appear to her. After her 12th birthday, she realized she had had enough of him and insisted on moving back with her parents. They had already produced 2 more children since sending her away to live with her grandfather, as she worked very hard helping him with her younger brother and baby sister, so she wouldn't be sent back to Papa. But now she was old enough to be able to live where she wanted. She was also old enough, she reckoned, to dish out a little payback to the man who had taught her so many things she should not have had to learn. She was moving swiftly through the woods into the valley now, anxious to see the look on his face as he realized he could no longer treat her like he owned her. The eastern sky faded from black to gray as she emerged from the woods on the backside of Papa Bloom's property. She stepped as quietly as a mouse around the chicken pen, making sure no one was out of the house yet. The house was about 50 feet from the chicken pen. She moved as smooth and as deep water current towards the back of the house. She hadn't been here for years. Nothing much appeared to have changed. The chicken pens, the shed, the smokehouse, it all looked the same. The shiplap siding of the house was pale gray from years without fresh paint. The garden behind the shed was still well tended by her grandmother, as it always had been. Elm trees grew close enough together to touch each other, so the ground beneath them could not support any grass due to the constant shade. The dirt was hard and gray without much dust. Here and there, roots of the trees ran along the surface. She could see shallow holes with small structures built from side sticks and little paths cut between them like tiny roads. The same sort of pretend town she had once built as she played here. Vila's breathing became quick and shallow as her confrontation with Papa came ever closer. The increasing light told her sunrise was at hand. She straightened up and walked boldly around to the front of the porch and into the front door, which was never locked. In the back corner of the living room to her left was a short hallway. The only room in the house that had a door was Papa's bedroom. She opened it without hesitation and walked in to stand at the foot of his bed. Just enough morning light filtered into the room to allow her to see that he, like almost every other night, had a little girl in bed with him. She recognized the girl as her cousin Laura. Laura couldn't be more than 11 or 12 years old. The thought of it sickened Vila deep in her guts. Her grandfather began to stir. He rolled over slowly and looked up at Vila. He didn't appear to be at all surprised to see her standing over him. "Why, Vila, you finally decided to come around and see me again? Laura, child, why don't you make a little room for your cousin Vila?" He nudged Laura. She slid aside, a soft sigh escaping her lips as she drifted in sleep. An electric feeling began to surge through Vila's abdomen. Her entire body tingled all at once with the current. It sparked chaotically through her fingers and lips. Her breasts ached with ecstasy. Her loins moistened uncontrollably. Suddenly she felt 10 feet tall. She threw her shoulders back, drew in a deep breath, and looked down upon her grandfather with a savage blood in her eyes. "I will be free of you once and for all, you goddamn child molester." she hissed through her teeth. Papa obviously did not understand. Vila, girl, what the hell? She felt like a candle flame in a windstorm. From deep down, she forced 2 words to pass through her lips. Edgar Bloom. Every volt of the surging electricity inside of her suddenly switched off completely. The next instant, the world seemed muffled and silent to her. Nothing was happening. Confusion and fear seized her mind. Papa sat up in bed. What's this all about, child? Ain't you gonna join us? Don't you want to give me a... Edgar Bloom wasn't able to finish his sentence, nor would he ever begin another. His words turned into a sick-sounding gargle as his throat opened wide, like a second mouth. Blood and gore splattered across Vila's face, yet she stood unable to move. Her grandfather clutched at his throat and tried to scream. Then his head lurched over onto his right shoulder as the entire left side of his neck was torn out. He fell back onto the bed and was eviscerated in seconds. The girl beside him began to scream, but was stopped abruptly and shredded. The bed was barely visible now, underneath blood and entrails and torn human flesh. Vila's thoughts were just beginning to catch up with what she was seeing. A sick dread gripped her, and her bladder emptied. She tried to speak. Her lips felt thick and her tongue slow and clumsy. Words stumbled out of her mouth. No! What? What's happening? What? Then she caught a glimpse of the thing. Skunk, where'd you come from? It moved like flashes of lightning. It terrified her, and she turned and ran for the front door. As she moved through the house, she could hear explosive tearing sounds coming from every direction. There were 2 more bedrooms along the hall, and as she passed the doorless openings, she caught glimpses of her grandmother and her cousins being taken apart. The thing moved along with her so fast, she could not look anywhere without seeing its flood of destruction. It left nothing in one piece. It whirled around her like a cyclone, debris flying in its wake. No! She shrieked with such force she thought she felt something tear in her throat. Stop! All of her motions seemed agonizingly slow. She cleared the front door and ran back the way she had come. As she passed the chicken pen, feathers exploded from inside where the chickens were roosting, but she hardly noticed. She ran blindly through the woods, her calves and feet bleeding from briars and thorns. It took more than a mile of running for her to begin to tire, and she finally slowed to a walk. Sobs from her innermost being racked her and strained her every muscle. She came to a stop at a cool stream and washed the dried blood from her wounds. Her thoughts would not hold together. She could only sit and cry. She began to feel faint and allowed a soothing blackness to wash over her. When she woke up, he was there. Her face was streaked with dry tears. Her tears were bloodshot and puffy. Her ankles felt stiff and swollen. His eyes shone from just across the little stream. The half-moon rode high in the sky behind a ceiling of thin, streaked clouds, but its light could not penetrate the air between them. He seemed to cover himself in a blanket of darkness that spread around her as well. Pale yellow eyes studied her intimately. You! She tried to scream the word, but the sight of his eyes caused her to choke it off so that it came out of her throat like a croak. She drew in a quick breath, and fiercely determined look came back to her face. Why did he do that? What did you do to him? How could you do that? I didn't ask for that. All I wanted was to get Pawpaw. All I wanted was to teach him a lesson. All I wanted. Her sobs began to surface again. A new tear track crept down her cheek. His eyes widened. They raised slightly and moved towards her until he looked down at her from just above her forehead. His breath blew hot down her neck and chest, smelling like something had died. What you wanted. You have received what you asked for. You wanted him dead, and he is dead. Those who were with him are now at peace. But you seem to have forgotten that I said it would come with a price. Everything has a price. Now it is time for you to learn what the price would be. Would you care to have me explain it to you? Vila could not find the words. She wanted to lash out at him, but the terror of his presence was too much for her. Angry whimpers bubbled up from her vocal cords. He was so close to her now that she could see his wicked grin. His mouth seemed to overflow with fangs and razor-sharp teeth that crowded together in tight rows. He drew in a long breath and took in her scent with relish. He slowly released a dry chuckle and licked his upper lip with a serpentine tongue. What you have become, he said, is something I have been orchestrating for many years. Now I will see my work rewarded. Thanks to you, I fed well yesterday morning, but I will feed much better soon. The valley now belongs to me. I will do as I please. I will feed upon every living thing here, for every living thing here is mine to feed upon. Death will come to this valley, but not until I allow it to come. First will come fear and dread and terror. I will inspire bloodlust. I will cause savage hunger. I will turn mother against suckling and father against daughter. The valley has lived long in my ways, and now I will bring an ecstasy of rage and hate and pain. All will tremble. All will despair. In time, with exquisitely tortured desperation, all will plead for the peaceful oblivion of death. Slowly they will expire. Their final gasps will fade, and then peace will come. I will rest then. At night, the only sound will be the wildcat's growl and the owl's baleful call. In the day, a foul mist will cling to the ground and will carry the smell of the charnel pit. The peace of death will reign until, at my leisure, I begin the cycle anew. And I have you to thank, my child. You have obeyed. You have done well. His eyes flashed red for an instant. You need only obey me a little longer, and you can rule this place for many years to come. Do my bidding and receive my blessings. Your home will lie deep in the dark and mist. You will be feared and venerated. None will dare oppose you. None will cross you and survive. There is a house deep in the valley you have never seen, but you have heard it's there. The oldest and most vile witch lives there now. Yes, I can see it in your face. You know her name. She is Rhea. She knows what is coming, and she has prepared herself. She waits for you. Go and find her, or return to your home and your Eddie. I give you the freedom to choose. You may remain in the valley and share in its sufferings, or seek out Rhea and become her successor. Keep your beauty. Indulge your lusts. Many will come to you and will belong to you. You will decide their fates as you please. You will possess the power to control. His face tilted and lowered to her right side, just below her ribs. His tongue flicked on her skin, and she felt his teeth slowly sink in. She wailed in pain. Then she was released. Hot blood trickled down her side. Leave me now. Find her. Follow this stream as it flows downward. Waste no time. There is no time now to waste. Go. Now. Vila struggled sorely to her feet and broke free from his blanket of darkness. She would obey. She knew there was really no other choice, because he had won the game. She belonged to him now. She walked beside the stream in a daze. She moved along her way. She occasionally passed homesteads and could hear faint sounds of violence. Screams and vicious shouts tickled her ears. Animalistic voices echoed in the underbrush around her as she stumbled numbly along the edge of the water. A mix of terror and rage drove her deeper down into the valley. She thought of her parents. She thought of them asleep in their bed. She wished she could go to them and help them somehow, even though they had discarded her practically from birth. Somehow she knew there was no way to save them. Every man, woman, and child, an animal in the valley for pay for what she'd done. Vila was powerless to stop it now. She became aware as she traveled through the creek that the thing was with her. The sharp rattle of its bones could be heard as it moved effortlessly through the underbrush. Every small animal, unlucky enough to cross her path, was laid waste by the thing instantly. A man sitting by a campfire deep in the woods saw her and stood up in greeting, only to be shredded and left standing like an old scarecrow, briefly before crumbling to the ground in a heap. The thing had been visible to her in flashes of firelight as it climbed up one side of the man and down the other, its bony hands slashing across his body with deadly precision and immeasurable speed. Something sparked in her mind at the sight. Control. She had always craved control. It was not till she had gained control of her own life and learned to control the people around her that she had really begun to enjoy living. Control was the reason she had become a witch. She could not stand to do without it now. Panic and resentment had gripped her when she thought she had lost control of the thing she had worked so hard to summon. But now she was beginning to realize the truth. She could sense its mind. The thing completely belonged to her. It was just a matter of acceptance. All she needed to do was embrace things the way they were. Just stop resisting. Vila came to a particularly dense clump of briars and grapevines on the creek bank. Without a word, she pointed a finger at the barrier and watched while her pet scattered pieces of it all over the ground. A crooked little smile twitched on one side of her face. Then she waved her hand beyond the barrier, towards the thick underbrush blocking her progress down the creek, and the path was cleared for her as she resumed her walk further down into the valley. She now walked upright on smooth dirt as her pet cleared the way. It knew the way. She merely had to follow. At length she came to a dwelling that was hardly recognizable from the outside. It was made up of dense, interwoven variety of vines, briar, tree, and thorns. It was an impenetrable thicket. Vila's pet led her to the only entrance, a tunnel in the thick growth. She had to crouch down to pass through. She stepped slowly into the house of the old witch. At first the heat was stifling. Vila's breath was quick and shallow as she looked the place over. It appeared to be an immense cave. Dark expanses obscured its dimensions. Stone kilns and large pottery jars huddled together in the gloom. Several cook fires smoldered under cauldrons that bubbled steam and noxious gases. Rusty cages housed nervous varmints whose snouts and whiskers protruded between the bars and twitched in the uncertain light. An old barn owl perched on one of the cages and eyed her with casual haughtiness. Every dark corner of the house seemed to abound with rats, snakes, lizards, and spiders, who leisurely went about their own business. The largest part of the house was commanded by a massive fireplace. It appeared to be adobe. A large chair, formed from the gnarled stump of an old oak tree, faced the hearth. No one was sitting in the chair. Vila looked up above the mantel and got her first look at the owner of the house, the old witch Rhea, who stood precariously balanced on a small stool she had placed atop the mantel. With fluid motions and without a word, Rhea casually slipped her hands through the shackles that were attached to the chains that were anchored into the walls on either side of the chimney. She lifted her eyes to meet Vila's, and suddenly she kicked the stool out from under herself. She shrieked with pain as her weight violently jerked her arms straight, and the shackles built into her wrists. The shackle seemed to be designed to pinch tight as force was applied. After writhing from the initial shock of pain, her face began to relax and she looked down upon Vila. Hanging there naked, she looked ancient and emaciated. Her skin stretched across her bones. The only part of her that seemed to sag were her deflated breasts. She appeared to be made of old, dried-up rawhide. On her right side, Vila could see the whitened scar of the devil's bite. "I've waited for you," she groaned. "So long I've waited for the relief you bring. I pray you make my end quick." Vila's brow furrowed in confusion. A choked, slow cackle came from the old witch's throat. "Don't you understand, child? This is not so puzzling, is it? You need no teacher. You need not apprentice. He's already given you what you need. I'm tired. I'm ready to go to him. Hurry and send me." Slowly, Vila's expression began to relax. Things were becoming clear to her. Things were falling into place in her mind. "I see now," she told herself. "I see what I need to do. Embrace this. I don't have to worry anymore. I don't have to manipulate people anymore. I don't have to offer myself in trade anymore. People will come to me. People will tell me their secret desires. They will sheepishly ask me to provide them with things they lust for. They will plead with me to give them vengeance on the enemies, to grant them what they long for, and to help them feed the greed dwelling deep in their hearts. They will bring their requests to me. I will exercise control. I will control them all. I will make them beg and plead and grovel. They will not need the answers I alone will be able to provide. They will hate me and curse me, yet they will crave my attention and desire my favor. They will need me. Skunk! Instantly her pet sprang into action, scrabbling up the adobe like a lizard on a brick wall. The old witch's wish was granted. Her end came quickly. Her entrails fell to the mantel with a sick splat as she was gutted and shredded. When it had finished with her, the thing shoved her insides off the mantel and in front of the fire. Vila raised a hand and directed the fire to cremate the innards. Then she forced the heat and force of her mind on the corpse hanging over the mantel. She stopped just short of collapsing the entire fireplace, leaving a blackened stain where the old witch's body had hung. She thought it might be a nice bit of art. So she decided to leave the stain as it was. She turned the chair and studied it a moment. The stain where the old woman had sat so long was polished away by Vila's glance. The entire chair took on the look of having had many coats of shiny lacquer, and as she sat down into it, it became malleable just long enough to conform to every curve and contour of her body. Vila released a long, restful sigh as all the inhabitants of her new home resumed their normal business, and her loyal pet lay curled at her feet. She drifted quietly into a dreamless sleep. So quoth this raven. Thank you, my darlings, for joining me today. It means so much that you would come and listen to me and my stories. A thank you to Brian Marrow for sending me Vila. And a special thanks to my Patreon supporters, with a warm welcome to Charlotte Emerson, Ermin Case, Darren and Jennifer, and Laura. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.